Commander Zexai of the 3rd Galactic Observation Fleet had seen enough wars to fill several lifetimes. His 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern across his elongated skull, had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations across 47 star systems. His species, the Kethmori, were considered the galaxy's premier military analysts, their emotional detachment and tactical insight making them invaluable observers for the Galactic Council. That detachment served him well as he watched his sensors display the incoming catastrophe. "Sir," his navigation officer, Lieutenant Veltar, announced with barely contained panic, "long-range sensors are detecting a void swarm emergence signature. Magnitude 7. Zexhai's primary hands tightened on his command chair's armrests. A Magnitude 7 emergence meant approximately 50,000 void entities, nightmare creatures from the space between dimensions that consumed everything in their path. No civilization had ever survived a direct assault from a Magnitude 7 swarm. Distance to emergence point? Zex's eye asked, his voice maintaining the professional calm that had made him famous among his peers. 12 light hours from the Sol system, sir." The words hit the bridge like a physical blow. Sol system. Earth. The newest member of the Galactic Council, barely 50 years into their spacefaring era. The humans had been admitted to the Council more as a courtesy than anything else. Their technology was primitive, their understanding of galactic politics naive, and their military capabilities laughable by galactic standards. "Estimated time until the swarm reaches Earth?" Zexai inquired, already knowing the answer would be devastating. 6 standard hours, sir." At current velocity, the void swarm will reach the outer planets in approximately 4 hours and Earth itself in 6. Zexai closed all 4 eyes and ran tactical calculations through his mind. The standard protocol was clear: observe, record, and retreat. The Kethmori had learned long ago that some battles were unwinnable, and charging into certain death served no purpose other than adding to the casualty count. Earth had perhaps 24 functional warships, most of them converted mining vessels and exploration craft. Their most advanced weapons were primitive fusion missiles that would barely scratch a Void Reaper's hide. It would be a massacre. "Sir," Communications Officer Turnak spoke up, her voice tight with confusion. "We're receiving a transmission from Earth's defense coordinator. They're requesting immediate tactical consultation." "Put it through," Zexai ordered, curiosity overriding protocol. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a human male with graying hair and eyes that seemed far too calm for someone facing annihilation. The nameplate identified him as Admiral Marcus Chen, Earth Defense Force. "Commander Zexai," Chen said without preamble, his voice steady and professional, "our long-range sensors have detected the incoming threat. We understand this is outside your mandate, but we're requesting any tactical information you can provide about void swarm engagement protocols." Zexai blinked all 4 eyes in succession, a gesture of surprise among his people. "Admiral Chen, with respect, standard protocol in this situation is immediate evacuation. A Magnitude 7 swarm has never been successfully repelled. The recommended course of action is to abandon the system and relocate your population to refugee settlements in the Outer Rim." Chen's expression didn't change. "Commander, Earth has a population of nearly 9 billion people. Our fastest evacuation ships can carry perhaps 100,000 per vessel, and we have fewer than 50 ships capable of interstellar travel. Even if we had months instead of hours, we couldn't save even 1% of our population." The simple mathematics of the statement hung in the air like a death sentence. Zexai had observed dozens of civilizations face similar situations. Most descended into chaos, panic, and disorder before the end came. Some managed to maintain dignity in their final moments. None had ever simply stated the facts and asked for tactical advice. "Admiral," Zexai said carefully, "what exactly are you planning to do?" For the first time, Chen's expression shifted. A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, not one of humor, but of grim determination. "We're going to fight, Commander. Every ship, every weapon, every person who can hold a gun. We're going to make them work for it." Zexai felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Genuine shock. "Admiral, you must understand. Your weapons are largely ineffective against void entities. Your ships are outclassed by several orders of magnitude. The tactical mathematics are quite clear." "Mathematics?" Chen repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. "Commander, let me ask you something. In all your observations of warfare, have you ever seen humans fight?" "Your species has only been space-capable for 50 years, Zexai replied. "Your conflicts have been limited to your home system. That's not what I asked, Chen said, his voice carrying an undertone that made Zexai's translator work harder to convey meaning. Have you studied our history, our wars, the way we fight when everything is on the line? Zexai accessed his database, scanning through the cultural briefings prepared when Earth joined the Council. Humans were described as a moderately aggressive species, prone to tribal conflicts, but lacking the technological sophistication for serious galactic threats. Their military history was noted as being remarkably violent for their technological level, but that was attributed to their species' relative youth. Your military history has been reviewed, Zexai said diplomatically. Chen's smile widened slightly. Then you know we've never been very good at knowing when we're beaten. Commander, we're going to position our fleet in a defensive perimeter around Earth. We're going to establish kill zones using every weapon platform we can deploy. We're going to fight them in space, in orbit, in atmosphere, and, if necessary, on the ground. We're going to make every meter they advance cost them dearly. Admiral, Zexai said, his voice taking on the patient tone he might use with a child, you're describing a tactical impossibility. Your weapons cannot significantly damage void entities. Your ships cannot match their speed or maneuverability. Your defensive positions will be overrun in minutes. Probably, Chen agreed with disturbing calm. But we won't know until we try. And, Commander, there's something you need to understand about humans. We have a very bad habit of doing impossible things when the alternative is extinction. The transmission ended, leaving Zexai staring at a blank screen and trying to process what he had just heard. In his experience, species facing extinction typically reacted in one of three ways: panic and chaos, desperate attempts to flee, or dignified acceptance of the inevitable. He had never encountered a species that simply acknowledged the mathematical impossibility of their survival and then calmly proceeded to ignore those mathematics entirely. Sir, Lieutenant Veltar said quietly, the human fleet is beginning to deploy. They're taking up positions in the outer system. Zexai pulled up the tactical display, watching as Earth's pathetic collection of converted civilian vessels arranged themselves in what appeared to be a textbook defensive formation. It was actually quite competent, given their limitations. They were using the gravity wells of the outer planets to create choke points, positioning their few actual warships to provide maximum overlapping fields of fire. It was also completely useless against a void swarm. Distance to safe observation range, Zexai ordered. 15 light minutes, sir. We can maintain full sensor coverage from there while remaining outside the swarm's detection threshold. Adjust course accordingly, and begin full tactical recording. The Council will want a complete analysis of this engagement for the archives. As his ship began moving to a safe distance, Zexai continued watching the human deployment. More ships were appearing on sensors, civilian vessels that had been hastily armed with whatever weapons could be mounted on their hulls, cargo haulers with missile pods welded to their frames, passenger liners bristling with point defense guns, even small personal craft, their owners apparently volunteering to join Earth's hopeless defense. It was the most irrational thing Zexai had ever witnessed. Sir, Ternax announced, the humans are broadcasting on all frequencies. It appears to be some kind of rallying call? Put it through audio only, Zexai ordered. The bridge filled with a cacophony of human voices, hundreds of different communications channels carrying orders, updates, and conversations between the various ships. But underneath it all, threading through every transmission, was something else. Music. The humans were playing music? Analysis? Zexai requested. Ternax consulted her cultural database. It appears to be what humans call military marches and battle hymns, sir. Songs traditionally associated with warfare and morale building. Zexai listened to the strange melodies mixing with tactical communications, trying to understand the purpose. Morale was a concept his species understood intellectually. The psychological state of soldiers affected their performance in battle, but this was different. The humans weren't trying to maintain morale in a difficult but winnable fight. They were singing while flying towards certain death. The void swarm emerged from hyperspace like a cancer metastasizing in reality itself. Zexai's sensors screamed warnings as 50,000 nightmare entities poured into normal space, their crystalline forms reflecting no light and their presence seeming to bend space-time around them. Void Reapers, each the size of a small moon. Void Hunters, swift as thought and twice as deadly. Void Drones in numbers that defied counting. The swarm moved with perfect coordination, flowing toward the Sol system like a dark tide of annihilation. Human fleet is moving to intercept, Veltar reported unnecessarily. They could all see the tiny specks of light that represented Earth's defenders, accelerating toward the approaching darkness. Time to first contact? 11 minutes, sir. Zexay settled back in his command chair, prepared to witness the shortest military engagement in galactic history. The humans would fire their weapons, accomplish nothing meaningful, and be destroyed in a matter of minutes. It would be tragic but unremarkable. Another species learning too late that some enemies simply could not be fought. Except something was happening that wasn't supposed to happen. The human formation wasn't maintaining the neat defensive positions they had established. Instead, the ships were spreading out, creating a much wider engagement envelope than tactical doctrine would suggest. Their speed was increasing beyond what should have been safe operational parameters for their engine designs. Sir Veltar said, her voice carrying a note of confusion. The human vessels are exceeding their rated thrust specifications by approximately 30%. Zexay frowned, consulting the technical specifications Earth had provided when joining the Council. The humans were indeed pushing their ships well beyond safe operational limits. Thrust settings that should have torn their hulls apart or caused catastrophic engine failures. Sensor analysis on human vessel structural integrity. All ships showing stress indicators in the red zone, sir. But they're holding together. Somehow. The first human ship reached weapons range of the Void Swarm's leading edge. A converted mining vessel named New Caledonia, according to the registry, armed with improvised missile launchers and what appeared to be a jury-rigged mining laser scaled up to ridiculous proportions. The New Caledonia opened fire. Zexay expected to see the ineffectual light show that typically resulted when primitive weapons encountered void entity shielding. Instead, his sensors registered something impossible. The mining laser was actually penetrating Void Reaper armor. Analysis of human weapons effectiveness, he ordered, his voice sharp with disbelief. Ternax worked frantically at her console. Sir, the humans appear to have modified their weapons with some kind of... I'm not certain how to describe it. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our database. On screen, more human ships were engaging the swarm's vanguard. Missiles that should have been harmlessly absorbed by void shielding were detonating with force far beyond their specifications. Energy weapons designed for asteroid mining were carving through armor that had shrugged off the most advanced military hardware the galaxy could produce. And the humans were singing louder. The void swarm responded as it always did, with overwhelming force and perfect coordination. Void hunters peeled off from the main formation, their impossible speed carrying them toward the human ships like bolts of dark lightning. Void drones swarmed around the larger vessels, seeking to overwhelm them with sheer numbers. The New Caledonia vanished in a flash of annihilation as 3 void hunters converged on it simultaneously. The human fleet didn't break.
They didn't fall back. They didn't even slow down.
Instead, they did something that made Zexay's translator malfunction for several seconds as it tried to process what was being broadcast across all human frequencies. They got angry. Sensors are detecting massive power spikes across the human fleet, Veltar reported, her voice tight with disbelief. They're somehow increasing their weapons output in response to casualties. Zexay watched in fascination as Earth's defenders transformed before his eyes. Ships that had been fighting with disciplined professionalism suddenly became something else, something primal and furious and utterly terrifying. Their weapons fire increased in both intensity and accuracy. Their formation became more aggressive, pressing closer to the enemy despite mounting losses. And through it all, the music continued. But now it was different. Now it was joined by something else. Human voices raised not in song, but in sounds that Zexay's translator couldn't even identify. Raw noise that somehow conveyed meaning more clearly than words. They were war cries. The first Void Reaper died 17 minutes into the engagement. Zexay stared at his sensors, certain there had been some kind of malfunction. Void Reapers didn't die. They were beings of crystallized entropy, immune to conventional weapons and shielded by forces that existed outside normal space-time. The mathematical impossibility of destroying one had been proven in thousands of previous engagements. Confirmed destruction of Void Entity Designation Alpha 7, he ordered. Confirmed, sir. Human vessels Defiant and Courage appear to have coordinated a joint attack using, I'm still not certain what kind of weapons those are, sir. The energy signatures don't match anything we've ever recorded. On screen, the wreckage of the Void Reaper tumbled through space. Actual physical wreckage. Something that had been considered a force of nature had been reduced to debris by creatures the galaxy considered primitive. The Void Swarm paused. For the first time in recorded galactic history, a Void Swarm hesitated. The perfect coordination that had made them unstoppable faltered as they encountered something their collective intelligence couldn't process: effective resistance. The humans pressed their advantage. Zexahe watched ships that were barely holding together launch themselves at entities that existed partially outside reality itself, watched weapons that shouldn't have been able to harm gods of destruction tear through armor like paper, watched a species that had been deemed moderately advanced fight like legends come to life, and slowly, almost reluctantly, Zexahe began to understand. The humans weren't fighting a battle they could win. They were fighting a battle they refused to lose. The distinction, he was beginning to realize, was more important than all the tactical calculations in the galaxy. The human ship Righteous Fury was dying, and Commander Zexahe couldn't understand why it was still fighting. According to his sensors, the converted cargo hauler had lost primary power, suffered critical hull breaches in 4 sections, and had fires raging through what remained of its engine compartment. Any rational crew would have abandoned ship or at least fallen back for emergency repairs. Instead, the Righteous Fury was accelerating toward a cluster of void drones, its sole remaining weapon, a massively overcharged industrial plasma cutter, carving through enemy formations like a blade of pure destruction. "Sir," Lieutenant Veltar announced, her voice carrying notes of awe and horror in equal measure, "the human vessel is operating on emergency life support only. Atmospheric pressure is failing throughout most of the ship." Yet their increasing thrust, Zexahe focused his sensors on the doomed vessel, trying to understand what he was witnessing. The ship's crew should have been unconscious from oxygen deprivation by now, yet somehow they were not only conscious but fighting more effectively than when their ship had been fully operational. "Analysis of crew vital signs?" he requested. Ternax worked at her console, her face showing the confusion that Zexahe felt. "Sir, I'm reading extreme stress indicators. Heart rates well above what should be survivable for humans. Adrenaline levels that should cause cardiac arrest. Brain activity patterns that suggest they're operating in some kind of enhanced state." "Enhanced how?" I don't know, sir. It's as if fear and desperation are somehow making them more capable rather than less." The Righteous Fury finally died, taking 17 void drones with it in a final explosion that lit up Zexahe's sensors. But even as it perished, 2 more human ships moved to fill the gap in their formation. Not with the careful precision of tactical doctrine, but with the raw determination of beings who had forgotten that retreat was an option. "Casualty report on human forces," Zexahe ordered. 43% of their fleet destroyed or disabled, sir. By all tactical precedent, they should be withdrawing to regroup or attempting to negotiate surrender." Zexahe pulled up the communications channels again, listening to the chatter between human ships. There was no talk of surrender, no discussion of withdrawal. Instead, he heard damage reports being delivered with the same calm professionalism as weather updates, crew members volunteering for suicide missions as casually as requesting meal assignments, and commanders coordinating attacks that had no hope of success with the methodical precision of engineers solving technical problems. "Sir," Veltar interrupted his thoughts, "the Void Swarm is changing formation. They're actually responding to human tactics. This was wrong. This was impossible. Void Swarms didn't adapt to enemy tactics because no enemy had ever survived long enough to require adaptation. They operated with perfect coordination and overwhelming force because those had always been sufficient to achieve victory within minutes of first contact. Yet now, after nearly an hour of combat, the swarm was reorganizing itself into more defensive positions. The Void Reapers were pulling back to protect the smaller entities. Void Hunters were operating in larger groups instead of the independent attacks that had always been sufficient before. The humans had forced the Void Swarm to change its tactics. "Display tactical analysis of human weapons," Zexahe commanded, trying to understand how a species barely 50 years out of their gravity well was accomplishing the impossible. The data that appeared on his screen defied everything he knew about technology and physics. Human weapons were indeed primitive by galactic standards. Fusion missiles, particle beams, and plasma projectors that were perhaps 1,000 years behind the cutting edge. Yet somehow they were achieving penetration and damage effects that surpassed weapons systems orders of magnitude more advanced. "Sir," Ternax said hesitantly, "I think I understand what's happening with their weapons. Explain." "The humans aren't just firing standard munitions, sir. They're modifying them. In real time, during combat." Zexahe blinked all 4 eyes simultaneously. "That's impossible. Weapons modification requires extensive testing, careful calibration, safety protocols. Yes, sir, it should be impossible. But look at these sensor readings. The humans are taking standard fusion warheads and somehow increasing their yield by factors of 3 or 4. They're overcharging particle beams beyond any safe operating parameters. They're jury-rigging industrial equipment into weapons that technically shouldn't function. And these modifications work. Not only do they work, sir, they're becoming more effective as the battle progresses. It's as if the humans are learning how to hurt the void entities by watching what happens when they try. Zexay studied the data more carefully, his analytical mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Human engineering was supposed to be conservative, methodical, bound by safety regulations and careful testing. Instead, he was witnessing the most reckless and innovative weapons development in galactic history, performed in the middle of a battle while under enemy fire. A new voice joined the communication channels. Young, female, speaking with the rapid-fire precision of someone coordinating multiple technical projects simultaneously. All ships! This is Engineer Santos on the Defiant. We've identified a resonance frequency that destabilizes Void Hunter shield matrices, transmitting modulation patterns now. Set your particle beams to cycling frequencies between 847 and 851 terahertz. Repeat, cycling frequencies 847 to 851 terahertz. Within minutes, human weapons fire changed color and intensity as ships across the fleet implemented the modification. The effect on Void Hunters was immediate and devastating. Their previously impenetrable shields flickered and failed, leaving them vulnerable to conventional weapons. Sir, Veltar said, her voice hollow with disbelief, the humans just developed an effective counter to Void Hunter defensive systems in the middle of active combat. In less than an hour of engagement, Zexay watched another Void Reaper die under concentrated human fire, its crystalline structure shattering like glass under weapons that had been mining equipment that morning. The tactical impossibility of what he was witnessing was making his head hurt. Communication from human command vessel, Ternax announced. Put Admiral Chen through, Zexkai ordered. The human commander appeared on screen again, his uniform scorched and his face showing signs of exhaustion and stress. Behind him, Zexai could see the frantic activity of a command center in the middle of a desperate battle. Commander Zexai, Chen said without preamble, we need to discuss tactical coordination. Admiral, I must remind you that the Galactic Council's observation protocols prevent direct intervention in local conflicts. Chen's expression hardened slightly. Commander, in approximately 2 hours, either Earth will still exist or it won't. If it doesn't exist, your observation protocols won't matter much. If it does exist, it will be because we found a way to stop something that the rest of the galaxy considers unstoppable. The logic was simple, direct, and completely correct. Zexkai found himself in the unprecedented position of witnessing military history being rewritten in real time. What do you propose, Admiral? Your sensors are better than ours. Much better. You can track void entities at ranges where our systems lose resolution. You can identify their command structures, their coordination nodes, their tactical weak points, information we can use, and in return, Commander, your species gets to be the one that helped humanity save Earth instead of the one that watched it burn. Zexai considered the proposal. Sharing tactical information wouldn't technically violate the observation protocols. They weren't providing weapons or direct assistance, merely data that the humans could interpret as they chose. And Chen was correct about the broader implications. If the humans somehow managed to survive this engagement, the military ramifications would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. Very well, Admiral. We'll provide sensor data and tactical analysis. Thank you, Commander. And, sir? When this is over, we need to have a conversation about what else is coming. What else is coming? Chen's smile returned grim and determined as before. Commander, this swarm isn't operating independently. Our long-range sensors are detecting movement in hyperspace. Lots of movement. If we're right, this Magnitude 7 swarm is just the advanced scout for something much larger. The transmission ended, leaving Zexai staring at sensor displays that suddenly felt inadequate for the scope of what might be approaching. His mind raced through the implications. If Chen was correct, if this was merely the opening engagement of a larger invasion, then everything the galaxy thought it knew about military strategy and defense planning was about to become obsolete. Begin full sensor sweep of hyperspace anomalies, he ordered, and prepare detailed tactical analysis of Void Swarm command structure for transmission to human forces. As his crew worked to implement the new orders, Zexai watched the battle rage across his displays. Human ships continued their impossible fight, turning mining equipment into weapons of war, converting civilian vessels into instruments of destruction, and somehow holding their own against an enemy that had never been defeated. The ship Indomitable Will caught his attention as it executed a maneuver that violated several fundamental principles of space combat. The heavy freighter had lost its primary engines and was using attitude thrusters to spin itself into a controlled tumble while firing its weapons. The technique should have been suicide. Spinning ships couldn't maintain target locks or coordinated fire patterns. Instead, the indomitable will was using its rotation to bring multiple weapons to bear on targets in sequence, creating a continuous stream of fire that was devastating a formation of void drones. It was madness. It was improvised. It was working. "Sir," Ternax announced, "we're receiving detailed tactical requests from human vessels. They want specific targeting data for individual void entities, power distribution analysis for Reaper shield systems, and..." "Sir?" "They're asking for mathematical models of hyperspace emergence patterns. They want to predict where the next swarm will appear?" "Yes, sir." "And Commander, based on their questions, I think they're planning something that goes well beyond defensive operations." Zexhay accessed the human communication channels again, listening to the coordinated chatter of a military force that had somehow transformed itself from a collection of obsolete civilian vessels into something that resembled a professional military unit. The change had taken place in less than 2 hours, under fire, while suffering catastrophic casualties. It shouldn't have been possible. "Upload all requested tactical data to human command vessels," he ordered, "and prepare for full-spectrum analysis of whatever the humans are planning. I have a feeling we're about to witness something unprecedented." The Void Swarm was beginning to show signs of actual damage, not the token losses that might occur in prolonged operations, but systematic destruction that was affecting their operational capability. 3 Void Reapers destroyed, hundreds of hunters and drones eliminated, and their perfect coordination beginning to show cracks as they adapted to human tactics that kept changing faster than they could counter. And through it all, the humans kept fighting. Ships that should have been scrap metal continued operating. Crews that should have been dead from radiation exposure or explosive decompression kept manning their stations. Weapons that should have melted from overuse continued firing at rates that defied their design specifications. Zexhay was beginning to understand that he wasn't just observing a military engagement. He was witnessing the birth of a new type of warfare, one that wasn't based on technological superiority or tactical brilliance, but on something far more dangerous: the absolute refusal to accept defeat. The humans had turned desperation into a weapon more powerful than anything in the galactic arsenal. And if they survived the next few hours, the balance of power in the galaxy would never be the same. The human ship Last Stand was already dead when it executed the most brilliant tactical maneuver Commander Zexhay had ever witnessed. The destroyer-class vessel had suffered catastrophic damage 20 minutes earlier when 3 Void Reapers concentrated their fire on its position. Primary power was gone, life support had failed throughout most of the ship, and massive hull breaches had vented atmosphere from 7 compartments. By any reasonable measure, the Last Stand should have been nothing more than a drifting tomb. Instead, its remaining crew of 12 humans had managed to maintain minimal maneuvering control and were using the ship's death throes as a weapon. "Sir," Lieutenant Velter announced, her voice carrying a note of profound confusion, "the Last Stand is... I'm not certain how to describe this. They're using explosive decompression to alter their trajectory." Zexhay focused his sensors on the dying vessel, trying to understand what he was witnessing. The humans had deliberately breached their remaining intact compartments, using the escaping atmosphere as improvised thrust to direct their ship toward a formation of void hunters. It was insane. It was desperate. "It was working. They're turning their ship into a guided missile," Ternax observed, her voice hollow with disbelief. "The Last Stand struck the Void Hunter formation at tremendous velocity, its reactor containment failing at precisely the moment of impact. The resulting explosion took out 4 hunters and damaged 2 more, a trade ratio that should have been impossible given the technological disparity between the forces." But what disturbed Zexhay more than the tactical effectiveness of the maneuver was the communication he had intercepted from the Last Stand's captain just before impact. All ships, this is Morrison. Recommend using reactor overload as primary kinetic weapon against hunter formations. Optimal detonation timing is 0.7 seconds after hull contact. Morrison out." The humans were turning their own deaths into teaching moments. "Sir," Feltar said quietly, "we're receiving similar transmissions from other human vessels. They're sharing tactical data right up until the moment of destruction." Zexhay pulled up the communication logs, scanning through the final messages from doomed human ships. What he found defied everything he understood about military psychology and battlefield behavior. Engineering reports reactor containment failure in 30 seconds. All ships be advised, void drone swarms vulnerable to concentrated particle bursts. when their formation density exceeds 12 units per cubic kilometer. Hull breach on decks 7 through 12, losing atmosphere rapidly. Recommend using emergency oxygen venting to extend engagement window for point defense systems. This is Captain Rodriguez on the Vengeance. We're going down, but we've identified the resonance frequency that destabilizes Reaper shield matrices. Transmitting data now. Make them count. Each dying ship was adding to humanity's collective knowledge of how to fight the Void Swarm. Death wasn't the end of their contribution to the battle. It was the beginning of their legacy, passed on to their surviving comrades in the form of tactical intelligence bought with blood. Analysis of human learning curve, Zexhai ordered, trying to quantify the impossible thing he was witnessing. Ternax worked at her console for several minutes before responding. Sir, the humans have improved their weapons effectiveness by approximately 400% since the engagement began. Their tactical coordination has increased by similar margins. They are adapting and evolving their strategy faster than our computers can model. How is that possible? I don't know, sir. According to galactic military doctrine, combat effectiveness should degrade under extended engagement due to fatigue, casualties, and equipment failure. Instead, the humans appear to be getting more dangerous as the battle progresses. Zexhai watched as another wave of human ships engaged a formation of Void Reapers. These weren't the same desperate, barely coordinated attacks he had witnessed at the beginning of the battle. These were precision strikes, executed with surgical timing and devastating effectiveness. Ships that had been mining vessels that morning were now fighting like they had been designed for war from the beginning. The lead vessel in the attack formation was the Defiant, a heavy cruiser that had started the engagement as a deep space mining platform. Its captain, a woman named Sarah Chen, Admiral Chen's daughter, according to the personnel files, was orchestrating an attack pattern that utilized 7 different ship types in perfect coordination. All wings! This is Defiant Actual! Chen's voice came over the communication channel, calm and professional despite the chaos surrounding her. Pattern Delta 7 on my mark. Remember, we've got one shot at this before they adapt to the frequency modulation. Strike teams Alpha and Beta, you're our insurance policy if this doesn't work. Mark. The human ships moved with precision that would have impressed Zexhai even if they had been operating with state-of-the-art equipment and full crews. The fact that they were accomplishing it with damaged vessels, improvised weapons, and crews operating on emergency life support was beyond his ability to comprehend. The Void Reapers died in less than 30 seconds. Not damaged. Not driven back. Completely destroyed, their crystalline structures shattered by weapons that shouldn't have been able to scratch their armor. 7 massive entities that had been considered forces of nature, eliminated by creatures the galaxy had dismissed as technologically primitive. Sir, Veltar announced, her voice tight with something approaching panic. Long-range sensors are detecting multiple hyperspace emergent signatures. The Admiral was correct. This was just the advance force. Zexhai studied the sensor data, his professional comm beginning to crack. 17 separate emergence points, each showing the characteristic patterns of a magnitude 5 or higher void swarm. The humans had just finished fighting 50,000 entities and were about to face more than 300,000. Estimated time to emergence? First wave in 47 minutes, sir. Full deployment within 2 hours. The tactical mathematics were clear. Impossible had just become ludicrous. No military force in galactic history could have survived the engagement the humans had just won, let alone prepared to face an enemy 6 times larger immediately afterward. Communication from Admiral Chen, Ternax announced. Put him through. Chen appeared on screen again, but this time Zex's Hay was struck by the change in the man's appearance. The exhaustion and stress were still there, but underneath them was something else. Confidence. The quiet assurance of someone who had just accomplished something he had been told was impossible and was preparing to do it again. Commander Zexahe, Chen began, our sensors have detected the incoming reinforcements. We need to discuss immediate tactical coordination. Admiral, with respect, your casualties from this engagement alone. 67%, Chen interrupted. 67% of our ships destroyed or too damaged for further combat. But, Commander, the 33% that remain are worth 10 times what they were when this engagement began. Zexhai studied the human fleet status displays, trying to understand Chen's claim. The surviving ships did indeed show signs of extensive modification and improvement. Weapon systems had been upgraded mid-battle, hull designs had been reinforced with salvaged materials, and the crews were operating with an efficiency that spoke of hard-won experience. What are you proposing, Admiral? Not just survive their attacks, not just delay them. We've learned how to systematically destroy void entities using technology the galaxy considers obsolete. But we can't do it alone against numbers like this. The Galactic Council's non-interference protocols are about to become irrelevant, Chen interrupted again, his voice carrying an edge of urgency. Commander, if Earth falls, the Void will have learned everything we've learned. They'll adapt their tactics, improve their defenses, and the next species they encounter won't have the advantage of fighting an enemy that doesn't understand human warfare. The logic was compelling and terrifying in equal measure. Zexai had watched the Void Swarm adapt to human tactics in real time during the engagement. If they were allowed to retreat and share that knowledge with the larger collective, the tactical advantages humanity had discovered would be neutralized. What specifically are you requesting, Commander? Chen's expression became grim. We need ships, Commander. Fast ships with long-range sensors and communication capabilities. We need to coordinate with other species in this sector, warn them what's coming, and share the tactical intelligence we've developed. Admiral, the galactic military response to a void incursion of this magnitude is evacuation and quarantine. No species has ever successfully defended against a magnitude 7 swarm, let alone 17 of them. Because no species has ever fought like humans, Chen replied with simple certainty. Commander, we've just proven that void entities can be destroyed using conventional weapons if you understand their weaknesses. We've developed targeting protocols, weapons, modifications, and tactical doctrines that can be transmitted to any species with comparable technology. Zexai felt something shift in his understanding of the strategic situation. For the first time in his career, he was looking at a military commander who wasn't asking for help to survive. Chen was asking for help to win. The political implications of direct Galactic Council involvement will be a lot less complicated than explaining to the Council why we allowed the Void to develop immunity to the only effective tactics anyone has ever discovered, Chen interrupted for the third time. Commander, every minute we spend debating protocol is a minute the Void spends learning how to counter our advantages. The communication channel suddenly filled with new voices as other human ships joined the transmission. Admiral, this is Captain Santos on the Retribution. We finished analyzing wreckage from the Reapers we killed. I think we can scale up the resonance frequency attack for use against larger formations. Admiral, Engineering Section 7 has completed modifications to the fusion missiles. We can increase yield by 600%, but the delivery systems won't survive the launch. Admiral, this is Colonel Martinez from the ground forces. If they make it to the surface, we've got some ideas about urban warfare tactics that might surprise them. Zexai listened to the stream of reports, updates, and tactical proposals with growing amazement. The humans weren't just preparing to continue fighting, they were actively developing new ways to fight. In the brief respite between engagements, they were turning their entire civilization into a military research and development project. Commander, Chen said, his attention returning to Zexai, the next 17 swarms will emerge expecting to face the same tactics we used against the first one. They're going to encounter something entirely different, but only if we have the coordination and support to implement it properly. The decision point had arrived, and Zexai found himself in the unprecedented position of potentially authorizing the first direct Galactic Council military intervention in a void incursion. The political ramifications would be enormous. The military ramifications could be revolutionary. Admiral, he said finally, uploading Council emergency communication protocols now. You'll have direct access to the rapid response networks for this entire sector. Use them wisely. Chen smiled. The first genuine smile Zexai had seen from the human commander. Thank you, Commander. And, sir? When this is over, the galaxy is going to be a very different place. As the transmission ended, Zexai began preparing for the most important strategic communication of his career. The Galactic Council needed to know that everything they thought they understood about warfare, technology, and the limits of military possibility had just been proven wrong by a species barely 50 years into its spacefaring era. The humans hadn't just learned to fight the void. They had learned to win. The first alien warship to arrive at the Sol system was the Kefmori battlecruiser Eternal Wisdom, commanded by Fleet Admiral Zenthor, Zex AI's own military superior. The second was a Villani dreadnought called Storm of Justice. Within 6 hours of Admiral Chen's communication to the Galactic Council's emergency networks, 17 different species had dispatched their fastest warships to Earth. Commander Zexai watched the impromptu fleet take shape around Earth's orbital space, trying to process the unprecedented nature of what he was witnessing. Never in galactic history had so many species responded so quickly to a call for military assistance. More importantly, they had come not to evacuate survivors or provide humanitarian aid, but to learn from the humans how to fight an enemy previously considered undefeatable. "Sir," Lieutenant Veltar announced, her voice carrying notes of awe, "the human Admiral Chen is requesting immediate tactical conference with all Allied commanders. He's proposing to share complete operational intelligence about Void Entity vulnerabilities." "Put it through to the main conference network," Zexisai ordered. "Full translation matrix for all participating species." The holographic display activated, revealing a virtual conference room filled with the most diverse collection of military minds the galaxy had ever assembled. Kethmari, Villani, Zephyrian, Altarian, and 13 other species, each representing civilizations that had been enemies, competitors, or reluctant allies for generations. All of them united by the simple desire to learn how to kill something that had been killing them for centuries. Admiral Chen appeared at the center of the display, still wearing his battle-worn uniform and flanked by several of his senior staff. Behind them, Zexihai could see the frantic activity of a command center preparing for the largest military operation in human history. "Fellow commanders," Chen began without preamble, "we have approximately 37 minutes before the first wave of Void reinforcements arrives. I'm going to tell you everything we've learned about how to fight them, and then we're going to coordinate the largest combined fleet action the galaxy has ever seen." Fleet Admiral Zenthor spoke first, his 4 eyes focusing intently on the human commander. "Admiral Chen, with respect, Kathmori military doctrine has been analyzing void entities for 3 centuries. Our conclusion is that effective resistance is impossible given current galactic technology levels." Chen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a look that Zexhe had learned to recognize as dangerous. "Admiral Zenthor, with respect, your military doctrine has been wrong for 3 centuries. We killed 8 Void Reapers and approximately 4,000 lesser entities in our first engagement. We're going to kill a lot more in the next one." The silence that followed was profound. Even accounting for translation delays, the complete lack of response from 17 different military commanders spoke volumes about the impact of Chen's words. Commander Valish of the Villani Dreadnought finally broke the silence. "Admiral, you're claiming that Earth's defensive fleet achieved a casualty ratio against void entities that exceeds anything in recorded galactic military history." "By orders of magnitude." "I'm not claiming anything, Commander," Chen replied calmly. "I'm stating facts, and I'm about to explain how we did it so you can do it too." What followed was the most remarkable tactical briefing in galactic history. Chen and his staff systematically dismantled 3 centuries of accepted military wisdom about void entities, replacing it with hard-won intelligence bought with human blood and ingenuity. "First principle," Chen announced as technical diagrams appeared on the displays, "void entities are not immune to conventional weapons. They're resistant to them, but resistance can be overcome with proper frequency modulation and energy concentration." The technical specifications that followed would have been impressive coming from a species with advanced military technology. Coming from humans, they were revolutionary. Frequency patterns that destabilized void shielding, targeting algorithms that identified structural weak points in Reaper armor, tactical formations that maximized overlapping fields of fire against swarm entities. Commander Zarthi of the Altarian Confederation spoke up, her crystalline voice carrying overtones of confusion. "Admiral Chen, these weapons modifications exceed the theoretical output limits of the technology you're describing. How are you achieving these energy levels without catastrophic system failures?" Chen turned to one of his staff officers, a young woman whose uniform bore the insignia of a chief engineer. "Captain Santos, would you explain the principles of desperation engineering to our allies?" Captain Santos stepped forward, her expression carrying the exhausted confidence of someone who had just spent several hours rewriting the laws of physics through practical application. "Commanders, the key insight is that safety margins exist to prevent equipment failure under normal operating conditions. When equipment failure means extinction, normal operating conditions become irrelevant. We've been running our systems at between 300 and 600% of rated specifications." "That should be impossible," Commander Valesh interjected. "Sustained overload at those levels would destroy any known technology." "Yes, sir, it should be impossible," Santos agreed. "But it turns out that most equipment can tolerate much higher stress levels than their specifications suggest, especially when the alternative is letting your species go extinct. We've lost equipment, certainly. But we've also discovered that fusion reactors can be pushed much harder than anyone thought, that particle beam projectors can maintain coherence at energy levels that should cause immediate failure, and that hull integrity can be maintained through applications of emergency engineering that would horrify any safety inspector." Zexai listened to the technical discussion with growing amazement. The humans weren't just sharing tactical intelligence, they were fundamentally redefining what was considered possible with existing galactic technology. Every species represented in the conference possessed weapons and ships that could theoretically be modified using human techniques. Second principle, Chen continued as new diagrams appeared, void entities operate under perfect coordination because they've never faced opposition that required tactical adaptation. Disrupting their coordination protocols is more effective than trying to overwhelm them with firepower. The tactical formations that followed were works of art disguised as military doctrine. Human ships operating in patterns that looked chaotic but were actually precisely calculated to force void entities into reactive positions, feint attacks that drew swarm elements into killing grounds, sacrificial maneuvers that turned individual ship losses into strategic advantages. Fleet Admiral Zenithor interrupted, his voice carrying professional respect that hadn't been there before. These tactical doctrines assume casualty rates that most military commanders would consider unacceptable. Chen's expression hardened slightly. Admiral, acceptable casualty rates are a luxury for species that have alternatives. When extinction is the alternative to heavy casualties, casualty rates become irrelevant. Every human ship that dies takes multiple void entities with it. Every human crew that sacrifices itself provides tactical intelligence that saves others. Acceptable losses become whatever it takes to win. The concept seemed to ripple through the assembled commanders like a physical force. Zek's AI could see them reconsidering everything they thought they knew about military strategy, about acceptable losses, about the mathematics of survival. Third principle, Chen continued, technological superiority means nothing if you're not willing to use it beyond safe parameters. Every species in this conference has access to weapons and ships that could destroy void entities if you're willing to accept the risks of pushing them past their design limits. Captain Santos activated new displays showing weapons modification protocols that could be implemented by any species with comparable technology. The modifications were brilliant, dangerous, and completely effective. They were also the kind of engineering decisions that no rational military would consider under normal circumstances. Commanders, Chen said as the technical briefing concluded, we have 28 minutes before the first wave arrives. Each of your ships can implement these modifications in approximately 15 minutes if you're willing to accept the risks. The question is simple. Do you want to evacuate your forces and maintain your equipment, or do you want to stay and learn how to kill gods? The response was immediate and unanimous. 17 different species representing civilizations that had spent millennia avoiding direct confrontation with void incursions committed their most advanced warships to an experimental military doctrine developed by a species they had considered primitive. Admiral Chen, Fleet Admiral Zenithor announced, the Kethmori Third Fleet places itself under your tactical command. The Valani Dreadnought Storm of Justice volunteering for your most dangerous assignments, Admiral. Commander Velesh added. Altarian fast attack squadrons ready to implement human tactical doctrines. One by one, every commander in the conference committed their forces to the most desperate military gamble in galactic history. They were about to face an enemy that had never been defeated, using tactics that had never been tested, with weapons that were operating beyond their safe parameters. Thank you, all of you, Chen said, his voice carrying genuine emotion for the first time since Zexay had met him.
Commanders, we're about to find out if courage is contagious.
If it is, the Void is about to encounter something it's never faced before, a galaxy that refuses to surrender. The conference ended as the assembled fleet began implementing human modifications to their weapons and defensive systems. Zex AI watched ships from 17 different species pushing their technology beyond safe limits, adopting tactics that their military doctrines would have considered suicidal, preparing to fight an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for generations. Sir, Lieutenant Veltar announced, first wave emergence detected. Magnitude 6 swarm, estimated strength 42,000 entities. Zexai studied the tactical displays as the largest combined fleet in galactic history, prepared to test whether human warfare could be taught to other species. Kethmori battlecruisers operating in human attack formations, Vellani dreadnoughts implementing desperation engineering protocols. Altarian fast attack craft equipped with overcharged weapon systems that should have been impossible. Open communication to all ships, Zex's High ordered. This is Commander Zex High to all vessels. Today we discover whether the universe can learn to fight like humans. All ships, all species, prepare for engagement. The Void Swarm emerged into normal space expecting to face the scattered remnants of a broken human defense force. Instead, they encountered something that had never existed in galactic history. A unified fleet of 17 species operating under human tactical doctrine, equipped with weapons pushed beyond their design limits and commanded by beings who had just learned that extinction could be fought. The galaxy was about to discover what humans had always known, that the most dangerous opponent isn't the one with the best weapons or the most advanced technology. It's the one who refuses to give up, even when giving up makes perfect sense. Commander Zexai had witnessed many battles in his career, but he had never seen the universe itself learn to fight until the moment 17 species opened fire simultaneously using human tactical doctrine. The Void Swarm that emerged into the Sol system was the largest single force deployment in recorded galactic history. 42,000 entities, including 73 Void Reapers, arranged in perfect coordination patterns that had broken the will of entire civilizations. They emerged expecting to face the scattered remnants of a primitive human defense force. Instead, they encountered something unprecedented. A unified fleet representing 17 different galactic civilizations, all operating under tactical doctrines developed by the species they had previously considered the least militarily sophisticated in the galaxy. The opening volley was a symphony of destruction that redefined what Zexai thought possible in space combat. Kethmori battlecruisers fired particle beams operating at 600% of rated power, their weapons creating coherent energy streams that carved through Void Reaper armor like plasma cutting through crystalline structures. Villani dreadnoughts launched fusion missiles modified with human frequency modulation techniques, each warhead carrying the destructive potential of a stellar explosion concentrated into a package the size of a shuttlecraft. Altarian fast attack squadrons implemented human swarm tactics, their ships moving in patterns that looked like chaos but were actually precisely calculated mathematical formations designed to maximize target saturation while minimizing their own exposure to counterfire. Zephyrian destroyers used human engineering principles to push their shields beyond theoretical limits, creating defensive bubbles capable of withstanding direct hits from weapons that should have vaporized them instantly. The effect on the Void entities was immediate and catastrophic. "Sir," Lieutenant Velter announced, her voice carrying a note of profound disbelief. "First wave casualty assessment, 17 Void Reapers destroyed, approximately 6,000 lesser entities eliminated. Total Allied casualties, 3 ships damaged, 0 destroyed." Zexai stared at the tactical display, certain that his sensors had malfunctioned. The casualty ratio was beyond impossible. It represented a complete reversal of every recorded Void engagement in galactic history. For the first time since the entities had been encountered, they were taking heavier losses than their opponents. "Confirm those figures," he ordered. Turnax worked frantically at her console. "Confirm, sir." The combined fleet has achieved approximately a 50-to-1 casualty ratio in favor of Allied forces. And, sir, the Void Swarm they're retreating. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Void Swarms didn't retreat. They didn't withdraw. They attacked with perfect coordination and overwhelming force until either they or their enemies ceased to exist. The concept of tactical withdrawal wasn't part of their behavioral patterns because it had never been necessary. Yet, on his display, Zexai could clearly see Void entities falling back from the engagement zone, their perfect formations beginning to show signs of actual confusion as they encountered something their collective intelligence couldn't process: systematic, effective resistance. "Communication from Admiral Chen," Ternax announced. "Put him through immediately." Chen appeared on screen, his expression showing the grim satisfaction of someone who had just witnessed the validation of everything he had sacrificed to achieve. Behind him, his command staff was coordinating the largest military operation in human history with the calm efficiency of professionals who had learned to treat the impossible as routine. "All Allied commanders," Chen announced. "First wave engagement successful. Void entities are withdrawing to regroup, which gives us approximately 47 minutes before the second wave arrives. We're going to use that time to implement Phase 2 of the tactical doctrine." Fleet Admiral Zenthor's voice joined the channel, carrying overtones of professional respect that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. "Admiral Chen, Kethmori forces, stand ready for whatever you propose. We have never achieved casualty ratios like this against Void entities." "None of us have," Chen replied. "And that's exactly why Phase 2 is going to work. Commanders, the Void Collective operates on the assumption that effective resistance is impossible. They've never had to adapt their tactics because they've never encountered opposition that required adaptation. We're going to teach them why that was a mistake." The tactical briefing that followed redefined Zexai's understanding of strategic thinking. Chen wasn't just planning to defeat the remaining Void forces. He was planning to systematically dismantle their entire operational philosophy, turning their greatest strength into a critical vulnerability. "The Void operates through perfect coordination," Chen explained, as tactical displays showed projected enemy formations. Every entity knows the position and status of every other entity instantaneously. It's what makes them so effective against conventional military forces, but it's also what makes them predictable. Captain Santos activated new displays showing mathematical models that hurt Zex's head to contemplate. If you can predict their coordination patterns, you can manipulate them. Force them into positions where their perfect knowledge becomes a disadvantage rather than an advantage. "What are you proposing, Admiral?" Commander Valesh asked. Chen's smile carried edges that made Zex's translator work harder to convey meaning. "We're going to teach them to be afraid." The concept was so alien that several translation matrices simply failed to process it. Fear was an emotion experienced by individual beings facing personal danger. Void entities were collective consciousnesses that existed partially outside normal space-time. The idea that they could experience fear was like suggesting that mathematics could feel pain. "Admiral," Commander Zarthi interjected, her crystalline voice carrying harmonic overtones of confusion, "void entities do not experience individual emotions. They operate as a collective intelligence without personal survival instincts." "That's what everyone believes," Chen agreed. "But we've been monitoring their communication patterns during our engagements. They're not just adapting their tactics, they're showing signs of actual uncertainty. Hesitation. For the first time in their existence, they're encountering something they can't immediately understand and overwhelm." The tactical implications hit Zex high like a physical blow. If Chen was correct, if void entities could experience something analogous to uncertainty or hesitation, then their perfect coordination could be disrupted through psychological warfare as well as direct combat. "How do you propose to exploit this vulnerability?" Fleet Admiral Zenther asked. "Phase 2 involves creating situations where the Void Collective encounters scenarios that contradict everything they know about galactic military capabilities," Chen explained. "We're going to show them things that shouldn't be possible, force them to make tactical decisions without perfect information, and systematically destroy their assumption that they understand the nature of their enemies."
The plan that Chen outlined was simultaneously brilliant and terrifying.
Combined fleet elements would implement tactics that violated fundamental principles of space combat, using sacrificial maneuvers to create false vulnerabilities that would draw void forces into prepared killing grounds. Allied ships would operate beyond their theoretical capabilities, demonstrating weapons effectiveness that contradicted everything the Void Collective thought it knew about galactic technology. Most importantly, they would coordinate their attacks in patterns that looked random, but were actually designed to create cascading failures in void coordination protocols. Each successful engagement would not only eliminate enemy forces, but also introduce new variables into the collective intelligence as tactical calculations, forcing them to expend processing power on uncertainty rather than coordination. "Commanders," Chen concluded, "we're about to conduct the largest psychological warfare operation in galactic history against an enemy that doesn't technically possess a psychology. If it works, we'll have turned their greatest strength into their primary weakness." "And if it doesn't work?" Commander Valesh asked. Chen's expression became grim. "Then we'll die fighting something that learned from our tactics, and the next species they encounter won't have the advantages we've developed. But commanders, failure isn't an option we're prepared to accept. The second wave of void entities emerged into normal space to find something that should have been impossible. A combined fleet of 17 species operating in perfect coordination, implementing tactics that contradicted everything in the galactic military database, and displaying weapons effectiveness that exceeded their theoretical maximums by orders of magnitude. The battle that followed redefined warfare itself. Zexai watched as Kethamori battlecruisers executed maneuvers that should have torn their hulls apart, using gravitational stress as a weapon against enemy formations. The Lani dreadnoughts coordinated with Altarian fast attack craft to create crossfire patterns that forced void entities into positions where their perfect coordination became a liability rather than an asset. Human ships led charges that looked like suicide runs but were actually precisely calculated to draw enemy forces into overlapping kill zones. Species that had been enemies for generations coordinated their attacks with precision that spoke of shared purpose and mutual trust forged in the crucible of impossible circumstances. And through it all, the void entities showed something they had never displayed before: hesitation. "Sir," Veltar announced, her voice carrying overtones of awe, "void formation patterns are becoming increasingly erratic. They're showing response delays of up to 14 seconds between stimulus and reaction." 14 seconds was an eternity in space combat. For entities that had previously operated with instantaneous coordination, any delay represented a fundamental breakdown in their operational effectiveness. The third wave arrived to find the second wave in full retreat. their perfect formations shattered by tactics they couldn't predict or counter. The fourth wave lasted 18 minutes before withdrawing. By the time the seventh wave emerged, void entities were actively avoiding engagement, attempting to flee the system rather than continue fighting an enemy they could no longer understand. The final engagement lasted less than 10 minutes. Zex AI watched as the largest void incursion in galactic history simply stopped. Stopped fighting, stopped coordinating, stopped advancing. The collective intelligence that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries encountered something it had never experienced: comprehensive tactical defeat at the hands of beings it had considered primitives. All void entities withdrawing from normal space, Ternax announced, her voice hollow with disbelief. Long-range sensors indicate hyperspace emergence signatures moving away from the galactic core. They're leaving. The communication channels erupted with voices from 17 different species, all expressing variations of the same thought. They had just witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. Not just a military victory, but a fundamental shift in the balance of power that would reshape interstellar politics for generations to come. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the celebration, calm and professional as always. All commanders, this is Admiral Chen. Phase 3 tactical protocols are now in effect. We're going to make sure they never come back. But Zexai was no longer listening to tactical discussions. He was watching the sensor readings that showed void entities, beings that had been considered forces of nature, fleeing in apparent terror from creatures they had previously dismissed as insignificant. The humans hadn't just defeated the void, they had taught the universe how to roar. And as Zexai contemplated the implications of what he had witnessed, he finally understood why every advanced civilization in the galaxy had instinctively feared the day when humanity would learn to fight among the stars. It wasn't because humans were more technologically advanced, more numerous, or more tactically brilliant than other species. It was because, when humans fought, they didn't just seek to win battles or defeat enemies. They fought to fundamentally change the nature of what was considered possible. They turned desperation into innovation, impossibility into tactical doctrine, and defeat into a learning opportunity that made them more dangerous the next time they encountered the same threat. The galaxy would never be the same, and somewhere in the darkness between the stars, ancient intelligences that had considered themselves gods of destruction were learning what it meant to be afraid of mortals who refused to accept that some enemies couldn't be defeated. The humans had taught the universe to fight like them, and the universe, as it turned out, was a very fast learner. S.